Hello and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you joining us today. Okay, we are jumping right into a topic that is just absolutely critical for anyone involved in ministry or soul care. Today, we're focusing on how to write ethical, truthful, and legally safe ministry care records. Documentation isn't just some boring bureaucracy we have to get through. It's actually a really profound act of stewardship. If you're serving at Restoring Hope Ministries, or RHM, you already know that caring for vulnerable people requires incredible diligence. So today, we're going to break down exactly how to document that beautiful, Christ-centered care in a way that is both safe and totally accurate.
But let's start with a really practical, everyday concern. How do you actually document soul care without sounding like a therapist? Seriously, if you have ever stared at a blank screen after a deeply spiritual conversation with a counselee, totally paralyzed, worrying about using the wrong words or accidentally stepping out of your legal scope, well, you are definitely not alone. That anxiety is totally valid. We want to be precise, right? But we absolutely do not want to misrepresent what we do. And that is the exact problem we're going to solve in this explainer today. To get us there, we've got a clear, actionable roadmap. We're going to cover 1. The conviction behind words. 2. Keeping the SOAP skeleton. 3. Translating clinical to pastoral. 4. Writing the objective section. And finally, 5. Anchoring care with Scripture.
So let's dive into Section 1, the conviction behind words. Language matters immensely. Over in Wisconsin, where RHM operates, the law makes a very clear distinction between pastoral care and licensed professional practice. Now, the core issue isn't whether pastoral counsel can happen, of course it can, but whether ministry workers are representing themselves as licensed professionals when they literally aren't credentialed to do so. Our words absolutely have to match our actual role.
At the very heart of RHM's record keeping is this core conviction. A biblical counseling SOAP note should be true, restrained, useful, supervised when needed, and anchored in Scripture. Sometimes people think that just because we do biblical counseling, we can kind of be informal or loose with our notes. But actually, biblical ethics doesn't lower the standard of care, it raises our reverence for it. We pursue truthfulness and humility in our notes because, ultimately, that honors God.
So the crucial takeaway here is that accurate documentation serves as a shield. Clear language protects the counselee from overreach. It protects the counselor, it protects the ministry, and it protects the church's public witness. By being super precise, we prevent role confusion. We stop the ministry from accidentally implying that services like psychotherapy were provided, when in reality, the service was purely biblical pastoral care.
That brings us perfectly to Section 2, keeping the SOAP skeleton. Now, the really great news here is that we do not need to invent some brand new, complicated charting system just to be biblically faithful. We're actually going to keep a very familiar framework that is already widely used.
We are maintaining the classic 4 parts of the standard SOAP structure: subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. Under subjective, we simply record the counselee's report, their own voice, and we completely avoid diagnosing them. Under objective, we record the counselor's actions using safe, biblical language. For the assessment, we provide a pastoral synthesis of the care needs, so we describe overarching themes like grief or shame without ever making a clinical diagnosis. And finally, the plan outlines concrete next steps like homework, prayer, and any supervision needs.
So, the bottom line here is incredibly simple but so profound. The skeleton stays exactly the same, but the vocabulary changes. Our job is not to dismantle the structure, but just to carefully translate that interpretive frame into accurate biblical care language. That's exactly how we write notes that are professionally recognizable, yet 100% theologically faithful.
Let's move right into Section 3 and look at that exact process, translating clinical to pastoral. Think of this as your hands-on translation guide. We're going to examine the specific words that protect truthfulness and keep us safely within our legal scope.
First up, let's talk about titles. We absolutely must avoid terms like therapist or psychotherapy because those legally imply you are performing licensed services. Instead, we use terms like biblical counselor or pastoral care. This accurately reflects the sacred service being provided without misleading anyone.
Next, think about how we describe the counselee's struggles. We have to ditch words like diagnosis or symptoms. Remember, biblical counselors must never diagnose. That is entirely outside our scope. Instead, we document the factual concern. We'll say things like presenting concern, reported distress, or observed pattern. See what we did there? We preserve the factual accuracy, but we completely strip away the clinical framing.
Let's take a really common clinical technique like active listening. In RHM documentation, the safe biblical and pastoral equivalents for the clinical term active listening are slow hearing, reflective listening, and careful attention. We are taking a standard clinical technique and translating it into a profound pastoral equivalent that's rooted in Christian formation.
Okay, so how do we actually write this down? That brings us to section 4, writing the objective section. This is the O in our SOAP note. We're really zooming in here because this is the specific space where RHM staff can most clearly document the actual biblical intervention they used during the session. So what exactly is the objective section? Well, it's the space to record what the biblical or pastoral counselor observed and actively did in the session. In a typical clinical chart, this is where therapeutic interventions go. But in our context, instead of medical treatments, we record pastoral actions. We document that we listened, maybe summarized the lament, asked Christ-like questions, taught practical wisdom, or prayed together.
I actually want to slow down here for a second because this is just so central to what we do. Let's look again at those pastoral equivalents to active listening: slow hearing, reflective listening, and careful attention. These aren't just safe, non-clinical terms we use to avoid trouble. They are literally our primary tools for honoring a counselee's story. We aren't just deploying some secular technique. We are carefully describing a ministry action that requires incredible restraint in speech so we can avoid any premature interpretation.
But how do we prove the biblical nature of these actions? Let's move to our final section, anchoring care with Scripture. This is where it all comes together. We use this metaphor of an anchor because we are keeping these pastoral actions safely, securely grounded in biblical logic.
When documenting this action in the objective section of your SOAP notes, you can anchor it with scripture parentheticals such as James 1:19 and Proverbs 25. This simple step visibly connects the pastoral actions of slow hearing and reflective listening right back to the text. We use those specific references to reflect the biblical logic of being quick to hear, slow to speak, and drawing out counsel from the heart. That's the beauty of James 1:19 and Proverbs 25. They perfectly describe the intervention we are documenting. We don't just active listen. We listen slowly, honoring the image of God in the person sitting right across from us, drawing out their heart before we ever try to offer direction.
Practically speaking, here is exactly what this looks like when you write it out in the objective section of a SOAP note. You might write, biblical counselor used reflective listening and maintained a slow-to-speak presence, JS 1:19, explored heart-level desire and fear, Prov 25. Do you see how clean, professional, and undeniably biblical that is? It documents the action absolutely perfectly. Now here's a crucial point to remember. Scripture references are anchors. They are not weapons, and they are definitely not proof texting shortcuts. We don't just decorate our notes by copying and pasting huge long Bible quotes into the document. We use short verse addresses inside parentheses. This identifies the biblical logic of the care action. And remember, we only ever cite verses that represent the action we actually took. We never use them to judge the counselee or make unsupported claims.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the deep conviction behind our words, to adapting that familiar SOAP skeleton, all the way to anchoring our care in verses like James 1:19. So I want to leave you with one final, provocative question to think about. If your notes were read tomorrow, what story would they tell about your care? Would they tell a story of ethical restraint, biblical faithfulness, and a deep, genuine respect for the person you counseled? Because documenting safely isn't about fear. It's about stewardship. It's about ensuring our records truly reflect the truth and love of Christ. Thank you so much for joining me today on this explainer. See you next time.